It was supposed to be a routine debate, another night of fiery rhetoric on a live panel hosted by a major network. The studio lights burned bright, the cameras rolled, and the atmosphere buzzed with political tension. Karoline Leavitt, known for her sharp tongue and unapologetic style, was seated across from former Trump advisor Kash Patel. The discussion had started as a typical clash over immigration policy and foreign intelligence, with each side defending their party lines. But tensions escalated quickly when Karoline, visibly irritated, leaned forward and said into the mic, "If you're so concerned about defending other countries' interests more than ours, maybe you should just leave the country, Kash." The room fell silent. The moderator blinked, unsure whether to intervene. Some audience members gasped, others fidgeted uncomfortably. The insult, veiled in nationalistic bravado, hit with the weight of something far deeper, an insinuation not just about politics, but about belonging. Kash Patel didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed slightly, his posture remained relaxed, but something in the air had shifted. Then he slowly leaned toward his mic, cleared his throat, and began to speak. Kash Patel didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist on the table or accuse her of anything directly. Instead, he began with a slow, deliberate tone that instantly commanded attention. "Karoline, I've served this country in ways you can't even begin to understand. From the battlefield of Afghanistan to the halls of national security, I've risked more than just my comfort to protect the freedoms that let you sit here and insult me." A murmur rippled through the studio. Karoline shifted in her chair, caught off guard by the composure in his voice. "I was born here. Raised here. I've prosecuted terrorists, hunted down threats to this country, and stood beside presidents, Republican and Democrat, to keep Americans safe. So when you tell me to leave the country because my skin tone or my surname doesn't match your image of patriotism," he paused, letting the moment breathe. The silence was louder than anything else in that room. "You're not insulting me. You're insulting every veteran, every immigrant's child who's worn a badge or held the line for this nation." The moderator sat frozen. The audience, now fully alert, had stopped whispering. Even the producers behind the glass didn't cut to commercial. Karoline opened her mouth to reply, but she hesitated. She wasn't ready for what Kash said next. Kash continued, his voice now edged with steel. "You think your version of America is the only valid one. But let me tell you what you don't know, because clearly, you haven't done your homework." He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a slim leather folder. Calmly, he slid it across the table toward the moderator, who opened it, eyes widening. "That's a classified clearance memo," Kash explained. "Signed during my tenure as Chief of Staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense. I had access to the most sensitive intelligence this country possesses, far beyond anything you've ever seen." Karoline's face paled. "While you were giving interviews, I was directing counterterrorism operations. While you were rehearsing your talking points, I was sitting across from our military's top generals planning drone strikes to eliminate real enemies." The moderator glanced toward the producers. "Still no cue to cut. I don't wear a flag pin to prove I'm American. My actions speak louder. I fought for this country when no one knew my name. I served it when it was thankless. And I won't be told by a political commentator with zero combat credentials to leave the nation I've bled for." The audience erupted in stunned applause. A few people stood up, not cheering, but in quiet, respectful recognition. Karoline's eyes darted across the room, suddenly unsure of her footing. "I've never heard him talk like this," someone whispered in the studio. Kash hadn't even raised his voice. And yet, the room now belonged to him. Karoline forced a smile, tight, uneasy. She leaned toward the mic, trying to reclaim the energy. "Kash, no one's questioning your service. But patriotism isn't a resume. It's values. And some of the things you've supported, well, they don't exactly scream American unity." Kash didn't blink. "Unity doesn't mean silence," he replied. "And it definitely doesn't mean letting people like you define who belongs in this country." There it was again, that sharp, undeniable clarity. No theatrics. Just facts. You've built a platform by dividing people. I've built my life protecting them. He turned slightly, now addressing the entire studio, not just Karoline. You can disagree with me on policy, on politics, even on party. That's American. But when you tell someone who's given everything to this nation that they should leave it, you're not defending patriotism. You're betraying it. Another ripple through the crowd. Even the moderator looked down, momentarily speechless. Karoline's voice trembled ever so slightly. So what, you want an apology? Kash turned back to her, measured and firm. No. I want you to think twice the next time you try to erase someone's American story just because it doesn't look like yours. A long silence followed. One that made even the cameras hesitate before switching angles. Karoline glanced to the side, as if expecting backup. None came. Because the audience, the nation, was already making up its mind. Outside the studio, the internet had already exploded. Clips of Kash Patel's response were circulating on every platform within minutes. Hashtags like hashtag Patel shut it down, hashtag American is more than a surname, and hashtag Karoline exposed were trending nationwide. News outlets, left and right, couldn't ignore it. The segment was being played on loops, dissected by pundits, praised by veterans, and even quoted by high-ranking officials. Back inside, Karoline sat stiff, her expression frozen somewhere between indignation and panic. The moderator finally broke the silence. We're going to take a break, he said, though the show was already running overtime. But no one moved, not the crew, not the panelists, not the audience. Kash took a breath and leaned back slightly, his point made. But as he glanced across the room, his eyes caught something unusual: respect. Not just from the crowd, but from people who likely disagreed with him politically. Karoline, still on air, tried once more. Look, if it came across as personal, that wasn't the intent. But the apology felt hollow. Everyone knew what they'd heard. And more importantly, they'd witnessed what came after: a man dismantle a dog whistle with grace, poise, and unshakable patriotism. A producer whispered to the moderator off camera. Phones are ringing off the hook. Veterans groups are calling. Even a former president's office. By the time the show officially ended, Kash Patel wasn't just a guest anymore. He was a headline. A voice. A reckoning. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric, but not in the way Karoline Leavitt expected. Producers buzzed around Kash Patel, asking if he'd consider returning for a special follow-up segment. One handed him a phone with a message from a major network executive: "We want your voice on primetime, tonight." Meanwhile, Karoline was ushered out quietly. No entourage. No interviews. No exit applause. Her team looked shaken. One aide muttered, "This is going to haunt her for a long time." Another just stared at the live social media feed, where even conservative veterans were blasting her comment. In the hallway, Kash stopped for a moment to breathe. A young cameraman, barely out of college, walked up nervously. "Sir, my dad served in the Marines. He watched everything you said. Just texted me. He said to tell you, thank you for saying what most of us are too tired to say." Kash smiled, extended his hand, and gave the kid a firm nod. "Tell your dad he already said it, just by serving." Across the country, responses flooded in. A military widow in Texas posted, "My husband wore the uniform too. Kash Patel spoke for us tonight." A retired intelligence officer tweeted, "I worked with Patel. Everything he said was real. And long overdue." And even a well-known senator, from the opposing party, posted, "Disagreements are healthy. But questioning someone's loyalty because of who they are." Patel's response was the definition of dignity. Karoline had sparked a fire. But it was Kash who turned it into a moment of national reflection. By the next morning, Karoline Leavitt's team was in full damage control mode. Press releases were drafted, then scrapped. A social media statement appeared briefly, then vanished after thousands of comments flooded in, mostly demanding a real apology. Not a clarification. Not a deflection. A genuine apology. Major networks invited her for interviews, but only under one condition: they wanted her to address the Patel incident directly. She declined them all. Meanwhile, Kash Patel appeared on 2 morning shows, where he was calm, articulate, and, above all, gracious. He didn't call Karoline names. He didn't gloat. He spoke about unity, service, and what it really means to be American. "This wasn't about me," he said on Good Morning America. "It's about something bigger. About what we choose to stand for in moments when it's easier to stay quiet." His poise made the contrast even starker. At Capitol Hill, the response was swift. Members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, began issuing public support for Patel. Senator McCain's daughter, Meghan, tweeted, "Kash Patel reminded us what strength actually looks like." That wasn't a takedown, it was a masterclass in patriotism. By noon, a prominent military veterans group issued a statement calling Karoline's remark deeply offensive and dangerous. And then came the bombshell: a bipartisan committee announced it would invite Patel to testify about the importance of national unity in post-service political life. Kash hadn't just won a debate. He'd ignited a national conversation. And Karoline? She was rapidly becoming the face of a political miscalculation with consequences far beyond a soundbite. The headlines by evening made it official: Kash Patel redefines the debate on patriotism, Leavitt faces backlash from all sides. Political talk shows couldn't stop playing the clip. It wasn't just the comment, plenty of politicians had slipped up before, it was Patel's response that made it unforgettable. Calm. Precise. Devastating. At a town hall in Ohio, a Republican voter stood up and said bluntly, "I voted for Karoline last time. But if this is how she talks to someone who's served, she doesn't speak for me." That same night, a high-profile conservative strategist went on air and said, "You don't tell a man with Kash Patel's record to leave the country. That's not just bad politics. It's bad character." Karoline's usual allies grew quiet. Her talking points weren't landing. When she tried to pivot to other issues, interviewers brought the conversation back to one line: leave the country. It stuck like a scar. Meanwhile, Patel took a different route. He visited a veteran rehabilitation center in Virginia, where he met with former service members struggling with PTSD and reintegration. No cameras. No speeches. Just listening. Word got out anyway. A nurse who spotted him tweeted, "He sat with every vet. Listened. No spotlight. That's leadership." Suddenly, the story was no longer about who said what on TV. It was about what came after. The pressure didn't let up. By the end of the week, Karoline Leavitt's donor list was shrinking. Quietly, but steadily, major conservative PACs began pulling support. One senior political analyst put it bluntly on air: she made a rookie mistake. But instead of owning it, she doubled down. And in today's climate, voters remember who apologized and who deflected. Calls for accountability came from unexpected corners. A coalition of military families, some of whom had previously endorsed her, released a joint letter. Ms. Leavitt's remarks weren't just disrespectful to Mr. Patel, they were an insult to every American who has served with honor regardless of their background. We urge her to take responsibility or step aside. Inside her camp, staffers began quitting. Rumors swirled of internal chaos. A leaked email from one aide said simply, "We're bleeding support, and she still doesn't get it." Meanwhile, Kash Patel continued speaking, not to fuel the outrage, but to steer it. He made a surprise appearance at a high school civics event in Florida, where he spoke to students about public service, identity, and rising above political noise. "You can love this country without shouting it," he told them. The strongest voices don't need to be the loudest. The applause was thunderous. Reporters, once skeptical of Patel, now described him as the rare figure who took a personal attack and turned it into a national reckoning. Karoline, on the other hand, was cornered. And she knew it. Days later, Karoline Leavitt finally appeared before cameras, but not in the way she usually did. Gone was the sharp blazer and trademark smirk. Instead, she stood behind a plain podium at a hastily arranged press conference, flanked by two aides who looked more like security than support. Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave away the pressure she'd been under. I want to address the comment I made during last week's panel discussion involving Mr. Kash Patel. She paused. The room was packed. Reporters' hands already hovered over keyboards. What I said was wrong. I let frustration get the better of me and crossed a line. I spoke in a way that undermined not only Mr. Patel's record but the values I claim to uphold. For that, I apologize. There was a brief flicker of camera flashes. A few gasps. It was the first time she'd publicly admitted fault in years. Mr. Patel has served this country with distinction. Whether we agree on policy or not, that service should never be dismissed or diminished. She looked down at her notes, then back up. I've spent the last several days reflecting on what I said, and on what it revealed about how we debate in today's political environment. I promise to do better. And I understand if many of you will hold me to that. The statement lasted under 4 minutes. No QA. No spin. It was human. But for many, too little, too late. Kash Patel, informed of the apology just minutes before it aired, issued only a short response, "I accept the apology. But I hope it's the beginning of a shift, not just in tone, but in how we treat those who serve and sacrifice." That response, measured, principled, only elevated his standing further. Karoline had closed the door on the scandal. But Kash? He had just stepped into something bigger. In the days following Karoline Leavitt's public apology, the national conversation shifted, away from scandal, and towards something larger, leadership. Kash Patel began receiving invitations from universities, policy forums, even international panels to speak on national unity and service. He declined most, choosing instead to focus on grassroots engagements. He toured veteran outreach centers. Visited inner-city schools. Spoke at naturalization ceremonies, where he was greeted with standing ovations before he even opened his mouth. One moment went viral, a clip of Kash speaking at a middle school in Detroit. "You don't have to prove you're American with your last name. You prove it with how you treat people, how you defend the truth, and how you serve when no one's watching." That quote was printed on posters. Quoted in sermons. Even etched into a mural painted by a group of veterans in Ohio. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt tried to repair her brand. But every new campaign video was flooded with comments referencing her "leave the country" remark. Every time she spoke about patriotism, people remembered the moment she tried to deny it to someone who had lived it. Political analysts noted a shift. Kash Patel may not have planned this, one commentator said. But he's become a symbol, of integrity, of calm under fire, and of what American leadership should look like. Soon, rumors began swirling. Would he run for office? The idea took root, planted not by consultants, but by everyday Americans who saw in Patel something rare. Not just a survivor of political combat, but a leader forged by it. 3 months later, Kash Patel stood behind a different podium, this one surrounded by hundreds of supporters, veterans, students, and reporters. The sun gleamed off the Capitol dome behind him. There was no teleprompter. No elaborate staging. Just a flag, a microphone, and the same steady voice that had cut through political noise months earlier. "I didn't plan to run for anything," he began. "But after what happened, I saw something shift, not just in the headlines, but in the hearts of people across this country. People tired of the yelling, the labels, the lines drawn in sand. People ready for someone who listens more than he talks. He paused as the crowd quieted. I've served this country in the shadows, behind the scenes, in dangerous places, during sleepless nights. And now, I believe it's time to serve in the light. Then came the moment that made the news cycle erupt again. Today, I'm officially announcing my candidacy for Congress. The crowd erupted. Not with celebrity hype, but with genuine hope. Support came in waves. Veterans groups endorsed him. Independents rallied. Even former skeptics called his run the most refreshing development in years. And Karoline Leavitt? She watched from afar, her influence dimming. The comment that once sparked outrage had now built a movement, just not the one she imagined. In the end, what began as a careless insult became a national reckoning. A turning point. A spotlight that exposed and elevated. Because in a country fractured by division, it wasn't volume or vengeance that won the day. It was something quieter. Stronger. Character.